Hey everybody, it's Dave from Resin Force Products, and today we're going to talk about installing flake floor systems onto a concrete garage floor. First thing you want to do is obviously have the customer choose the color of flake they want. Once you know the color of flake they want, there's many different colors to choose from. They can go to the store and get your shopping list and get all your supplies. To get started, you're going to need a generator. Of course, we've got high-powered equipment, and you need to make sure you have adequate power, either 110 and or 220 volt. So there's our generator to power our grinder, our vacuum, and our hand tools. And then of course we have a concrete grinder, many different brands on the market. You can buy one, you can rent one, whatever you have accessible to you. For concrete prep, we do require grinding and or shot blasting for our Resin Force products. Acid etching is not sufficient. The floor just will not last. The floor is only as good as the prep and the substrate. And of course we want to have a 20-year floor if possible. So the better the prep, the longer the floor is going to last. To go with the concrete grinder, we've got a nice industrial dust collector. It's a bigger vacuum. This specific model by Lavina is a 220 volt vacuum, but they also have similar vacuums in 110. I always recommend external power coming from a generator source if possible, and then that way you've got the adequate power to run your vacuum, your grinder, and then of course your hand tools. For your mixing station, there's some supplies you're going to want to have on hand in advance. We have our mixing bucket. This is a graduated mixing bucket with lines on it, so that way as you fill, you can measure off your either top coat or your prime coat. Typically you're going to mix entire kits at a time, but depending on the size of the floor, if you have to adjust the volume of your material putting on the floor, then you can use a measuring bucket such as this to measure how many gallons you need. This is our mixer. This is technically called a helix mixer, but again, many different types of mixers on the market, but we're going to need this to mix our A and our B for our primer coat and our top coat. And then you're going to have a mixing drill. I like these higher torque, low speed drills the best for mixing these materials, because you don't really want to introduce a lot of air into your mix. You just want to have a really good uniform mix. Having the high torque is great, but it also has to be a low speed mixing drill for this application, and these Bosch drills are perfect for that. Of course, the very fundamental basics would be a pole, an extension pole like this, that can extend to whatever length you want, so that way you're making longer strides instead of smaller strides. You're gonna need a notch squeegee to apply your base coat. This is an 1/8 inch notch squeegee. And then you're gonna want a flat squeegee to apply your top coat. This is a Big Bend roller frame. It's basically just an 18-inch roller frame to hold our roller cover. We supply these in our stores, and then you just apply this to the frame, and this is what you're gonna use to even out your top coat after you squeegee the top coat and for the base coat. This is a smaller roller frame with some small little rollers. These are perfect for doing edges, steps, and then of course we have chip brushes. These are just disposable throwaway chip brushes. They're very cheap. You're gonna use these to do any little touch-ups that the little small rollers can't get to. Works great just to stick in your back pocket, and then when you need it, you grab it and you can do what you gotta do. Of course, we're gonna have our duct tape or painter's tape. Duct tape is great for taping off concrete and or asphalt. And then the painter's tape is great for taping painted surfaces, drywall, whatever you're going around as far as the base of the perimeter of the walls. We've got garbage bags. We're also gonna want knee pads. We're also gonna want a respirator for doing our edge work when we're grinding around the edges. You don't need a respirator necessarily for your walk behind stand-up grinder, unless you don't have adequate dust collection, of course. But when you're doing your hand work on the floor with your edge grinder or your corner tool, then you're gonna wanna wear adequate respiration for proper PPE. In addition to having knee pads, of course, while you're kneeling and doing your prep, you're gonna need spike shoes for while you're applying the coating. So these spike shoes are perfect for that. Again, many different brands on the market. Some people even use cleats. That works as well. Just make sure you're not slipping and sliding on the floor as you're applying it. But you need to have your feet elevated off the floor at least a little bit, so that as you're walking through the material, applying it, you're not stepping in the material. You're using your cleats to do so. So let's just say we're gonna install this color flake. We're gonna go to the store and we're gonna get our boxes of flake. Typically, I would recommend getting 1 box per 200 square feet. So a 2-car garage is gonna be about 400 square feet. You're gonna need 2 boxes of flake. From there, you have to pick your prime coat, and your prime coat needs to match your flake. So using this color flake, we're gonna use Resin Force FlakeShield Beige, because the beige primer is gonna be a similar color to our flake blend, and that way they jive. If you were using a gray flake, such as one of these, then you're gonna use our light gray FlakeShield. After you get your base coat and your flake color, you're gonna need Easy Men to patch your cracks and your spalls. You're gonna need polyaspartic for your clear top coat. This is a UV resistant, UV stable system that's gonna not amber like epoxy will. So you wanna have the higher quality polyaspartic as your top coat. It's also very abrasion resistant. It's gonna resist chemicals. It's gonna hold up to the vehicle traffic, anything else you put in your garage, pets, chemicals, road salt, whatever you've got, that's a great top coat to use. And this is our Resin Force Easy Poly. So typically when you have cracks in the concrete, you're gonna start off by grinding your cracks using an adequate crack chaser. Something like this is a Bosch crack chaser. It's basically an angle grinder with a V blade on the angle grinder and then a shroud to collect your dust. If you don't have a shroud, just make sure you use proper ventilation with a proper dust control vacuum system. That works as well, but we like having everything contained as much as possible. So this Bosch crack chaser is great because you got the angle grinder, the shroud to hook your vacuum up to, and then the actual crack chaser blade on there for basically chasing your cracks to cut them out. So that way you can fill that crack with Resin Force Easy Mend. This is a 1-to-1 polyurea. It goes down kind of black and it dries gray. You can mix quartz sand into it, so that way you have a nice slurry system to fill your crack, slightly overfill it, grind it flush back to the concrete, and that's your crack patch or your spall repair. To grind the surface of the concrete, we have our concrete grinder. There's lots of different brands on the market, of course. You can buy one, you can rent one, but whatever you have access to using a smaller concrete grinder like this or something much larger, you can come in with a larger electric or propane grinder and then grind the surface of the concrete. And then if there's pitting, I recommend using a shot blaster to clean out any recessed areas of the pitting. And then to do your edges, use a 5-inch or a 7-inch hand grinder. And as you see here, this Bosch hand grinder, it's basically just another angle grinder with a cup wheel that goes on there and a shroud to collect the dust, which is connected to our vacuum. This is gonna work perfect for doing steps, working around the edges that the larger grinder cannot reach. If there's also any tight areas that I can't get into, then the hand grinder is perfect for that. And then to get into those little corners and around the doors and just in the corners of the room, you can use a multi-tool with a little triangle blade, and that'll get in those corners really good. We do want to prep the entire concrete surface. We don't want to just get close to the edge and then leave it. We want to get right to the edge so that the entire surface of the concrete is completely prepped. And once the concrete is completely prepped, we are ready for our primer coat. Before we do that, we want to make sure the concrete is completely clean and dust-free. You can do that by vacuuming 2 or 3 times, of course, with this dust collector and a really good wand. And then once that's vacuumed several times, then you can use a leaf blower just to make sure you get any debris that's in any corners or edges that you missed with a vacuum. Just get it all completely dust-free out of the garage, and then you can start setting up your mixing station. So as you can see, while we're squeegeeing across the floor, we're using the notch squeegee to gauge the amount of material that's going on the floor itself. And then we're just gonna plow it around like a snow plow to push the material evenly throughout the floor. Once the floor is completely squeegeed out, then we're gonna use our 18-inch roller with a 3/8-inch nap to even it out. And we're gonna roll it once or twice, typically at least once in one direction. If there's enough time with the material we're using and the temperature outside, we're gonna wanna cross roll it in a perpendicular motion just to make sure it's fully even and distributed. As we're throwing the flake, you can see we're throwing it out or up. We don't want to throw it directly down at the floor. If you throw it directly down at the floor, you're going to get all these bumps when you're done. Typically best to throw the flake out and or up in the air, let it flutter down, land on the floor. And this is what you call a full flake broadcast. We're not just doing a partial broadcast. A partial broadcast would be if you're just spritzing a little bit of flake around the floor and you're still seeing the base coat exposed, whereas we're doing a full broadcast so that after the entire floor is completely beached out with flake, that's all you see is the flake. You don't see any base coat. If you see any base coat that's coming through, any wet spots as the flake is settling in, just walk around the floor a little bit, don't drag your feet, march like you're picking your feet up in the air with your spikes so you don't scrape the floor, and then just apply more flake to those wet spots so that way it's a full distribution of flake and it's perfectly even before you do your reclaim after it's dried. Now that your base coat is dry, we're going to reclaim any loose flake that did not stick to the prime coat. To do that, we're going to sweep and we're going to scrape using a floor scraper to knock down any high points of flake that are stuck in the floor, and we're also going to vacuum up the excess. Typically, I like to sweep up as much as possible because we can reclaim that and use some of that for the next floor that we do with the same color. And then what remains after scraping and vacuuming, that's just garbage. That's just going to go in your vacuum and get thrown away. I typically like to vacuum at least 2 or 3 times just to make sure we get all of the loose flake off the floor prior to our top coat, and then scrape the floor at least once or twice using a floor scraper in opposite directions just so you don't miss any spots. After you're done mixing your top coat, you're gonna pour it right directly onto the floor. You do not wanna leave it in the bucket. And then we're gonna use our flat squeegee to spread it. What I like to do is pour the ribbon around the entire floor, and as one person is pouring it out of the bucket, there's another person going around the edges with a small roller and a chip brush, just getting the whole cut-in edge work done while the product is on the floor prior to the person coming with a squeegee. The reason why we need a flat squeegee is because our flake is now a textured surface, and we're essentially grout coating the top of that flake. After it's fully squeegeed around the floor, we're gonna use our 18" by 3/8 snap roller to evenly spread that top coat onto the floor so we have a really nice finish once we're done. Once the top coat is completely done, it's a good idea to lower the garage door about knee height, maybe shin height, and then you can use a 3mm plastic just to cover the apron. You can tape that to the door, tape that to the driveway, and basically tent and pitch that out, and that way nothing gets into the floor or on the floor. If you don't have all the tools and equipment you need, you can rent a concrete grinder, hand grinder, crack chaser, multi-tool, generator, vacuum. Any of these tools that you don't have, you can always buy or rent.